Hello, and welcome back. It is the holiday Halloween season currently, and as the Halloween season, I thought I should rank the movies that are most closely associated with, you guessed it, Halloween, and that is horror. Watched a fair amount of horror movies this October, and there were a fair few I liked, so I will go down and rank all of my favorite horror movies that I've ever seen. A few things to note before I get into this list. One, this is all just my opinion, and your opinion may be much different. This isn't the definitive best list of all time. This is just my favorites. Number two, my opinion will of course change over time. If you're watching this several months from now, my opinion very well might be different, and if you would like to see my updated opinion, please check out the IMDb list I have linked in the description below. Also, before we start this list, over half of you who watch my videos are not subscribed to my YouTube channel, so if you would be so kind, please consider subscribing. But with all that said, let's get into this. If you're in the majority, you've probably never heard of this movie. And I wouldn't blame you. Not very many people know about this movie. It only grossed around $20,000 in the box office. So, this is a very not well-known movie, I would say. And it's really underrated. The best way I can describe this movie is Home Alone, but more violent. The basic plot synopsis on IMDb reads as follows. On a quiet suburban street, a babysitter must defend a 12-year-old boy from intruders, only to discover it's far from a normal home invasion. And I would say that's true. This is far from a normal home invasion movie. It's not your standard horror movie, I would say. It does have a pretty big twist to it. I don't want to spoil very much about this movie, because I feel like it's best seen without knowing really what it's about. So the next movie on this list is 1988's Child's Play. And this is, of course, the movie where the Chucky franchise got started. I feel like some people nowadays give it a little bit of a bad rap, to be honest. Although it's still highly regarded and many people like it, some people say it's like campy or badly acted, but I don't think so. I think this movie is really great in every regard. I feel like the acting from the child actor is really great, which you don't see in a lot of movies, especially older ones. Although he does stutter on his lines sometimes and such, he is really only an 8-year-old boy. And that makes it all the more convincing, as he's trying to properly convey that he just saw a doll come alive, but he can't properly convey it because he's a little kid. And that adds to the terror of this movie, because he's trying to say what actually happened, but no one believes him because, of course, he's just a little kid. This movie is extremely terrifying from that perspective, especially in the beginning when you don't know if it's really all in his head or if it's actually happening, because you never really see the doll come alive, for sure. But towards the second half of the movie, you of course do see the doll come alive. The ending scene of the movie is also really great, with, even though many people think it's repetitive with the doll continuing to come back alive, I really love it. And the effects are also really great, especially for the time. It really makes it look like the doll's moving, and they had to use animatronics to convey that since CGI was not available, or at least widely available, in '88. So, if you like killer doll movies, I would recommend this, if you haven't seen it already. And if you just like horror movies in general, I would also recommend this. This is a classic, and I think it deserves to be watched. The next one is Night of the Living Dead from 1968. And this movie is a classic for a reason. This movie single-handedly began the modern zombie genre. And although there were, of course, zombie films before this movie, none of them were the dead coming back to life, had to shoot them in the head for them to die, they crave human flesh type zombies. This was the first movie to invent that, and I have to give it props for that automatically. But that's not the only thing about this movie that makes it great. You would expect for it to be just a straight up horror flick all about zombies, but it's not. It's a character piece. It shows these characters slowly basically losing their sanity inside a house during the zombie apocalypse. And for a 1968 movie, this is great. And this is one of the last black and white movies that was widely released. And the black and white really adds to the charm of this movie, I feel like. And the ending of this movie was something I wasn't expecting, but it is phenomenal. I would really recommend watching this movie. It is also one that is free. It's in the public domain, so you can pretty much watch it anywhere. And yeah, give this one a watch. The next movie is Poltergeist from 1982. And this movie is really great. This is rated PG, so you'd expect it to not be as gory or frightening as other movies. But this is just as, if not more frightening than a modern PG-13, if not R-rated movie. And although it doesn't have a whole lot of gore in it, the scenes do use that to their advantage, I would say. This movie is, of course, about ghosts. These ghosts contact the real world by talking to a little girl. And it's kind of crazy to think that a little child to be preyed upon by the supernatural. It's honestly a quite terrifying concept. And this movie does play up that terrifying factor. The movie has pretty great effects, I would say, great writing and directing. It is written by Steven Spielberg, Steven Spielberg. And it's directed by Tobe Hooper of Texas Chainsaw Massacre directing fame. I do definitely see his style bleeding through in this one. So give this one a watch. Next movie is Candyman. This movie is from 1992, and although there's very few horror movies from the 90s that I think are good, this one is definitely one of them. The lead actor in this movie is Virginia Madsen, and she plays Helen Lyle. And she does a great job. She is basically a reporter who wants to learn more about this Candyman myth. So she goes to Cabrini Green, a part of Chicago, to discover this Candyman character. And while she goes in thinking it's just a legend, it is much more than that. And while this movie does have a strong lead with Helen, the villain is just as enjoyable. The villain is played by Tony Todd, and he is really charming. This is another one of those movies that really plays off of the psychological aspect, if it's really real or not. If it's just her sort of going crazy, or if this is really what's happening. And while we go through the movie, it's clear to see this is really what's happening. None of the other characters really believe her. And the ending is really well done and amazing. And I can't recommend this one enough. If you like sort of psychological horrors, I do recommend this one, although this one also has some gore in it too, but it is mainly a psychological horror, I would say. So give this one a chance. The next movie is The Exorcist, and it is an extremely popular movie, I would say. When this movie came out, it was known as the scariest movie of all time. And while I don't necessarily think that is completely true anymore, it is pretty terrifying. This movie plays on the same fear as Poltergeist does. The fear of some outside entity basically taking advantage of a young child. Whereas in Poltergeist, it's ghosts. Here, it's demons. And the effects in this movie are still amazing to this day. And while yes, you can definitely get better effects if you sink hundreds of $millions into a movie nowadays using CGI, for the time, these effects were great, and they're still great. In addition to the practical effects, this movie has an amazing storyline based on the book of the same name. And this movie is very frightening also, as many of the characters in this movie don't believe what the parent of this child is saying. They think she's just going crazy and that it's really just something wrong with her daughter's brain. But the truth is that she is truly possessed by this entity. And all these characters are extremely strong. Not just Linda Blair, the person who played Reagan, the main girl being possessed, but also the main mom in this movie, and the assistant exorcist, Father Karras, and also the main exorcist in this movie, Father Merrin. And all these characters have amazing strength and character personalities, traits that are great. And the ending of this movie is absolutely phenomenal. So, I think this movie is amazing, and you should definitely check it out if you want to watch, like, a really good movie, and also enjoy classic films. This movie is The Silence of the Lambs, and some people would say this isn't a horror movie and would argue it's more of a psychological thriller, as that's what it was marketed as in the 90s. But I would say it is definitely a horror movie, and this movie sort of reminds me of Candyman in a way. Not just that it's a horror movie from the 90s, but in the way of the main protagonist is female, and like in Candyman, she's a very strong protagonist. She can figure out things by herself very easily. And also in Candyman, you have a villain character who's very charming. Candyman himself in Candyman is extremely charming.
They were slaughtering the spring lamb.
And the same thing can be said about Hannibal Lecter. And even though he does absolutely abhorrent things, he's very classy. He's not the main villain of this movie. He definitely helps out a lot more. than he hurts. The main villain of this movie is, of course, Buffalo Bill. He really plays the character he's trying to portray very well. You'll just have to watch this movie for yourself to see how amazing it is. I do really recommend this movie to everybody. I think it is great, but most people have probably seen it already, as it is extremely popular. So yeah, check this one out. This next movie is Alien. Love this movie. I watched it this summer. I don't know why I didn't watch it sooner. Many people might think this is a sci-fi movie at first glance, but it's absolutely not. Set this movie on Earth in a house, and this would basically be regarded as a horror movie. But people just call it a sci-fi because it takes place in space, which I think is ridiculous. This movie plays on the fear of the unknown, not knowing what's there, not knowing what's gonna hurt you, or if it can hurt you, or how it can hurt you. Really terrifying to think that you don't really know what's there. Also, this is another movie that has a strong female protagonist. Ripley is a great character, and she's a very strong, independent person. It is absolutely terrifying, but also in the end it ends up being really satisfying. Don't expect a sci-fi movie. Expect something pretty horrifying. And yeah, definitely check this one out. Who is Psycho? And if you've never seen this movie, you might be confused, as this is a movie from the 60s. A movie from 1960, in fact. So the fact that it takes a second spot might be confusing, but it is really great and ahead of its time. And it's honestly, if it came out now, it would still be ahead of its time. The plot is basically a woman ends up stealing money and leaving town. And on the way, she goes to the Bates Motel, and some pretty maniacal things end up happening there. And spoiler alert, I'm going to spoil this movie. So she gets killed within probably the first half of the movie, maybe the first 40 minutes, which was really surprising for a movie of this time. For a person that's so heavily marketed to be in a movie getting killed off so early. So throughout the whole movie, you think it's, Norman Bates' mother. But the end ends up throwing you for a loop, and it ends up being Norman Bates himself. And although I knew this was coming because this movie is so heavily referenced and everyone pretty much loves this movie, and references it all the time, so I've had this movie spoiled to me 100 times. I knew the entire plot, but somehow at the very end, when the chair holding a dead corpse of his mother gets turned around and you see that rotting corpse face, it was somehow so powerful to me, even though I saw it coming from a mile away. And that's one of the main reasons why I think this movie is so great. It somehow encapsulated me and made me just fall in love with this movie, even though I knew it was coming from a mile away. And even when I don't know what's gonna happen in the movie, I really never feel this effect. And I feel like you should definitely watch it as soon as possible. Now it's number 1. And that's 1984's Gremlins. And this is one of the few horror comedies I think works. I usually don't like horror comedy, even in really popular ones, like Dawn of the Dead. Evil Dead 2 was another one. This somehow blends it perfectly. It's so horrifying in certain scenes, such as the scenes where they burst from the eggs But a lot of scenes are really funny, like the bar scene and the movie scene. They're just so hilarious. And this is another PG rated horror movie, and some people debate whether this should be considered a horror movie because it does land on the comedy side a lot. But it is definitely a horror movie in my eyes. Acting in this movie is really well done. It's amazing. And so are the gremlin designs. The gremlin designs are absolutely out of this world. Not just the furry mogwai variants, but also the reptilian variants are both great. And I feel like if you haven't watched it, you should definitely give it a watch. And while you might not love it as I do, this movie is just so sentimental to me, which pretty much guarantees it the first spot on my list. So thank you for watching, and please make sure to like and subscribe. Definitely subscribe if you want to see more horror content like this. And follow me on my social media, link in the description. And leave a comment down below telling me your ranking of your favorite horror movies. And again, you will definitely disagree with me on some of these, if not all of them. And that's okay, everyone has their own opinions.